Are you more likely to break the bank or go broke trying? That seems to be the question, the perplexing question that all gamblers have to ask themselves. Now, we know this, and our philosophical viewpoint has been formulated over many years that most of us that gamble on things, sports, are essentially fueled by self sabotage, desire to lose money, fueled by investors' desire to lose money. That was the old line from Paul Kangas on the Nightly Business Report. By the way, good morning, everybody. Good to be with you here on today's edition of Bury Your Bookie. I'm Jeff DeForest. And we've been talking about gambling, at least I have, during the 50 plus years of been broadcasting, and it was very much not in vogue, not considered to be in good taste. Still remember the ugly visions of program directors at radio stations I was working at. These were pretty prominent stations here in the South Florida market. And you would start talking about, well, you know what, the line in this game is 3.5. And the program director would come running down the hall with a sledgehammer, ready to break the glass and just bust in there and yank you off the air like you were some really bad vaudeville act. And it was kind of taboo. I mean, think about this: Jimmy the Greek. They had to almost act as if he was talking explicitly about some sexual exploit, as they would sort of separate him from the rest of the content there on the NFL football shows where he started this thing with the point spreads. Our old buddy, may he rest in peace. He was a South Florida radio legend, and of course was internationally known from his appearances on ESPN. The late great Hank Goldberg, who was a good friend of mine over the years. They actually had his segment outside at one point of the ESPN shows when they were doing pregame shows on the National Football League, because the NFL wanted nothing to do with it. You would hear constantly people say, we don't pay any attention to point spreads. We don't want to talk about that. And it was a taboo subject. Now that we clearly have seen has changed dramatically, where it's immersed and inserted in virtually everything. Guys calling a ball game. Imagine Vince Scully going into a little thing like, hey, pull up a chair and stay a while. Here are the Dodgers, and they're taking on the New York Mets. And what could be a very significant game? The Mets at minus 135. Look like a pretty good play today, all right? Here's the first pitch from Kershaw. I mean, that might be something that you would hear the man say. But by the way, on that subject, and Phil Mushnick, the great media commentator, a little bit sour about a lot of things, but he contends and has for many years that if Scully submitted his audition tape today because of his understated storytelling style, that he would not even get a sniff of an interview for the Dodger play-by-play job, because all anybody wants from these networks are guys that are screaming, you can get 2-1 right now. If you bet the Dodgers 0 runs in the first inning is also going off at minus 350. The world has changed, and it's changed dramatically in this regard. And of course, fueled now by what you would have thought what would be insane proposition bets, exactly what's driving all of these entities and all of these sporting professional leagues to the massive prosperity that they're experiencing. I mean, think about it in this perspective. Yesterday in the NBA, Khris Middleton, I guess at times when he was with the Milwaukee Bucks, he was a contributor in their championship year with Giannis Antetokounmpo and company. Wasn't a bad player to have on your team, but an aging veteran, often injured. Now with the Wizards, you can't go much lower than that in terms of status in the NBA. You're playing for the Wizards like an aging Michael Jordan with Leonard Hamilton coaching the team. Irrelevant ball club. Khris Middleton, on of his own devices, has the opportunity to opt into a contract this year for $33 million a season for a guy that is going to do pretty much nothing, have zero impact on winning a championship. Your team is going to be out of contention, and you've got to give this guy $33 million. My goodness, how the world has changed. So and where is all this money coming from? Some people speculate that I was on a show with a guy yesterday, that if there was no gambling, the NFL and the NBA would be very much on the ropes in terms of being involved in the public focus. Now, I don't know if that's true about football. I'm not sure that basketball wouldn't exist if it wasn't for degenerate gambling, but certainly not to the levels that we're seeing today, where some middle-of-the-road guy on a team that's absolutely a bottom dweller, bag ladies by NBA standards, could opt in of his own choice. It's not even like he had to go send his agent in to talk to the GM and say, you know what, Khris is probably worth $33 million to average 11 points a game. $33 million a year for these players, much of which is being fueled by gambling. Now, where is this money coming from? as I'm beginning to think that I'm completely out of touch as we do these shows where we're talking about trying to pick a winner. This is an old philosophical thing that I would imagine most people would think you're flat out of your mind to subscribe to this theory. But people think too that I've read a lot where I'm referencing different things, and they're thinking, "Wow, this guy seems like he's read a lot of different stuff." Very limited in a number of books that I've read in my lifetime. One of which, though, was a long time ago, and this was among my school books that you used to pack in there, and you had the little elastic band that spread around, and you hooked them together. And in between my English grammar book and a math book, I had a book by a guy named Henry Bombs Away Bombsy. And it was a horse racing handicapping book. It was one of the first books I ever read, one of the few books I've ever read in its entirety. And his theory was this, and it wouldn't apply anymore. But I believe if you would subscribe to this theory, you'd be way ahead of the game from wherever you happen to stand right now. His theory was the only way to beat the races. He was a horse racing handicapper of some renown. You can Google him, and you'll still see favorable stuff, flattering stuff being written about Henry Bombs Away Bombsy. And his theory was that the only way to beat the races, you can't beat the races in general. If you're betting all 10 races on a card, this was before simulcasting. Now you're betting screen to screen. Your eyes are kaleidoscopic. As soon as you lose a race, boom, you're already looking, hey, what's the next post time? Woodbine? Okay, let me throw something together here. And it's as quick a way to extract your money from your pocket as you could possibly find. Bombsy's theory was only bet substantial amounts of money to win on horses that were 3-1 or better. And that if you did that and you didn't play every race, you had to absolutely have a strong opinion on the horse. And then if it was less than 3-1, you just lay off. You don't even bother. And if you were going to play the horse, no exactas. Exactas were very limited then. I don't even know if they existed when he wrote this book. But there were daily doubles and very few exotics. But he said the only way to win is to bet substantial amounts of money to win only on horses that are 3-1 or better. And if you think about that strategy today, I don't know that anybody is really applying that. I used to go to the track with a guy that he would just bet 10 and 10 on horses that he really liked. He sat out a lot of races. He only played one track, and you thought, how boring is this? This is boring as fuck. I don't know that I can control myself to do it. But that has all changed, and nobody for the most part, is subscribing to that philosophy. So the new thing is, of course, and we're seeing DraftKings and FanDuel. We've talked about it many times here on the program. How are they making all of this capital to the point where they're controlling virtually everything that goes on in the sporting world today? When you tune in the Super Bowl, is Roger Goodell sitting next to some Hall of Famer at the Super Bowl as it's being played? Is he sitting next to some executive from the National Football League? No, he's sitting next to the president of FanDuel or DraftKings or some gambling entity, things that in the past he would have completely denied any knowledge of, now warmly embracing it. And why is that? Because they took the fantasy player who was entering some league for $25 with a chance to win maybe $250 at the end, and they converted them into bettors that are constantly thinking and taking the approach that, well, it was only $10. It was only $25. I took a shot. And as we've been saying here on the program, they'll show you their phone or send you a text, and it's got green, 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 red. And they start lamenting, oh, my God, I had 5 out of 6. I can't believe it. And I came away with nothing. Think about how many of those nothings these guys are collecting on to be in the financial position that they're in. As you're trying to bury your bookmaker, and in reality, you are getting buried in the process and thinking that you're doing it in a very innocent and very, very conservative fashion. So I get a text last night from a friend of mine, and this would be the attraction, that's for sure, because it rarely happens. In fact, the text started out by saying, even a blind squirrel. And he sends me a ticket that a friend of his had played on a 4-person home run proposition bet last night. He has Aaron Judge and Ellie De La Cruz in the Yankees game against Cincinnati. And, of course, Judge in the throes of a woeful slump. He either snapped out of it last night or the night before. But nonetheless, he had been through a series of 25 at-bats where I think he had 2 or 3 hits, maybe less. I mean, it might have been 2 for 25 with 14 strikeouts. Guy that was hitting 400 looked like George Brett with power, even more power. through the majority of the season with the Yankees, who were rolling and cruising. It looked like they were going to control the American League East for the entire season. Not the case with the lowly Tampa Bay Rays still chasing them remarkably. How they are able to compete year after year is beyond comprehension. Is Judge likely to hit a home run? Yeah, I think the odds were like 3-1. Judge, you're getting 3-1 on Judge to hit a home run, plus 320 maybe. Sure, yeah, you could consider that. De La Cruz has now 18 home runs on a season. He hits one. And then he parlayed those two guys with two other guys in another game. Juan Soto in the Mets game against the Atlanta Braves. Soto's been on fire, so likelihood of him hitting a home run certainly was significant. And Ronald Acuna Jr. And Acuna knocks one out of the park. It kind of went like this. Here's Judge at the plate. Long fly ball, deep left field. This thing is going. Over and over for a four-component parlay. And so for $25, this guy cashes for $3,700. That is going to make you feel pretty good about things for a long time. But you really have to consider how are these bookmaking entities like FanDuel and DraftKings or any app that you use or source that you use to make these wagers, how are they making so much money if guys are cashing at phenomenal odds like that on any kind of level of frequency? They're not. So your money essentially is going up in smoke. Now another racetrack theory that might apply here is bet a little amount of money, a small amount of money to win a lot. That's always great. But how many losses do you incur in the process? Are you more likely to make several big scores in succession or just go broke trying? So the entire perspective on betting has changed immensely over the last, maybe more so in the last 10 years, 5 years, than you could have ever imagined. This evolution of prop betting and fantasy play that has now escalated to the point where people are putting real money on this all the time. It has to be just a devastating, overwhelming number of people that are losing their ass doing this, chasing the big dream. Then the number of people, it's almost like buying lottery tickets in a sense. And yet, every now and then, as Jim Lampley titled his book, it happened. It happened, and it happened for this guy last night. In fact, I think he hit another 2-home run parlay. This is a bet I never would even consider. So I'm having to do some self-examination here on Bury Your Bookie and ask myself, am I just too old school? Does anybody give a fuck about who wins these ball games against the point spread, where you're essentially weighing and laying 110 to win 100, versus something as bizarre as four guys hitting a home run on the same night that you happen to play those four guys in a parlay? One of them ends up with two doubles and a triple, and you lose, even though they had a phenomenal game. And that seems to be the direction that everybody's going in, and people are getting rich off of it, but it's mostly the people that are taking your bets than the people that are making your bets. So interesting philosophical change there as you look at, and it's always great, you feel good, and you start thinking to yourself, well, Jesus, maybe I should be doing this. And you have to imagine that, and this guy can now lose his next 250 times 10, 2,500. He could lose his next 15 bets and or more, next 150 bets, and still be in good shape against the bookie. And yet, those guys aren't crying because they had to pay this guy to $3,700 last night for his 4-man home run parlay. I was looking at some things here. Tyrese Halliburton out for the season now, upcoming season, in all likelihood, will miss the entire year for the Indiana Pacers. We already know that Jason Tatum, with a torn Achilles, same injury, is out for the Boston Celtics. Those were two teams you would have to imagine were going to be heavily favored in the NBA Eastern Conference if you're looking at future bets, and you just want to have something where you can sit back, relax, watch the whole season transpire, have a betting interest in virtually every game. It makes for a lot of fun when you make these kind of future bets. Again, you're probably laying out a small amount of money, maybe a stick for the chance to win a few thousand, but it transpires over a long period of time. So it's kind of soothing, interesting. You're outside with a cigar and a glass of wine or a scotch, and you're just enjoying the season from that perspective. So you're asking yourself, how wide open is the NBA East and maybe the chase for the NBA championship? People are using words like dynasty already associated with the Oklahoma City Thunder. 7 different teams have won the NBA title in the last 7 years. So hardly the kind of stuff of which dynasties are comprised of when you have a different winner every season. There are many teams, regardless of how good Oklahoma City looked during the regular season, they still were taken to the brink of disaster and defeat on two occasions. Now, they blew out Denver in their home game in Game 7 of their second-round series, but they were trailing at halftime to a compromised Indiana Pacers team in the seventh game of the championship series. Does that represent, I mean, does that remind you of the Boston Celtics? Where's Bill Russell? Larry Bird's not coming through that door, the old Rick Pitino thing. So my tendency would be they may well repeat. And at 2-1, it's very prohibitive, but you have to go Richard Dreyfuss on this thing and let it ride. And just as the tout comes up to you and says, hey, I like the form ball in here. And as soon as he walks away, you say to your partner, put a line through the four. It's just, if it happens without your money on it. OKC is plus 220 to repeat as champions in the NBA, a chalk league. So you're asking yourself, all right, that's the Western Conference. The Houston Rockets, have they improved themselves immensely by picking up an aging Kevin Durant? Maybe. They were a distant second in the standings, but they were the number 2 seed in the West. Did they do enough already to make you think that they can overcome what appears to be a very deep roster of excellent players that compete and seem to do it in perfect synchronization for the Oklahoma City Thunder? West, though, doesn't interest me as much as the East now does. With Halliburton out, Indiana Pacers compromised badly. With Tatum out, Boston Celtics compromised badly. And they're both, the Pacers actually, I think, are 60-1 to win the NBA title without Halliburton, whereas the Boston Celtics are a very modest 8 or 9-1 to win the NBA title next year. But a team that I think is being largely overlooked, and I might be tempted to throw a few bucks on this, and it's probably may as well just put the money into a Bunsen burner. But why not consider the Detroit Pistons? The Detroit Pistons were coming on, jobbed by the referees in Game 4 of their series against the New York Knicks. Otherwise, they're up 3-1 in that series and have a strong likelihood that they knock the Knicks out of the postseason in an earlier round, in the first round, actually, and go on and do some damage themselves. I mean, they're bringing back essentially the same team. No team improved internally from within more than the Pistons did last year. They went from a 14-win team to being a playoff contender and a formidable one at that, and had every chance to go ahead and advance against that New York Knicks team that everybody seemed to feel had cemented their chances of being a contender by getting the Karl Anthony Towns deal done before the season started. They gave up, some of their firepower in the process. DiVincenzo was a key player, and in the Western Conference, and of course, when you're looking at Hartenstein leaving via free agency, would have been an effective role player for them off the bench. They fire their coach. They appear to have no plan, the New York Knicks. Every coach that they've tried to make a move on has ended up getting a lucrative contract extension from their current team, whether it was Ime Udoka with the Houston Rockets or Billy Donovan with the Chicago Bulls. Almost any name that was mentioned, it was like being on the list of the Clockwork Orange. Any name that was mentioned ended up capitalizing. If you were a coach in the NBA, you had to have your agent out there with a megaphone riding down the streets, just screaming, "Hey, what? We got a call from the Knicks." And it ended up returning huge dividends for those people who managed to be involved in that conversation. But I don't know. Are the Knicks going to get that much better during the offseason? Where they would win the NBA East? Now the team, you're probably saying, hey, DeForest, what about the Cleveland Cavaliers? Aren't they a likely contender? Yes, but they failed to do it last year when they looked like they were going to be a monster. Did have some injuries. And so if you're looking to take a chance and maybe catch a price, I'm thinking about throwing a few bucks on the Detroit Pistons in the NBA futures. You're looking at me like I'm crazy, people, aren't you? But why not? At 60-1, you're getting 60-1 there as opposed to 8 or 9-1 on some of the other contenders that aren't the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs, by the way, are plus 650, which isn't terrible because you would think that the East is not wide open and not nearly as much as it might have been, but it is open for new contenders. So you would think the Cavs at 6-1 may be attractive, but the Pistons at 60-1 to go to and win the NBA championship. I don't know what their odds are to win the Eastern Conference or to get there, but they have to be pretty strong. Might be worth a little bit of a sniff if they can continue that ascent and continue to get better and better from within the organization there, which they have a young team. They might be missing some veteran leadership. But I'm not sure that that's necessary with now two teams in the East badly, badly compromised. By the way, in the NHL, it's the usual suspects. Panthers going for a three-peat. Our Florida Panthers, 7-1, along with the Oilers, who have now been to two straight Stanley Cup Finals, only to lose. So I don't know why that would make them more attractive than the Panthers, but they're sitting there at the same price, 7-1 to win the Stanley Cup next year, along with Colorado. Here's one, a long shot, but you're getting a good price on the Toronto Maple Leafs in the futures. Maple Leafs were up 2-0 on the Panthers, up 2-0 in game number 3. It looked like they were in a position to put the Panthers away in the second round, knock them out of the postseason, and end that run that they had established with two straight Stanley Cup final appearances and now 3 and 2 championships. Getting 20-1 on the Maple Leafs. It seems like it might be worth a little bit of a sniff. So we're looking way ahead. We're looking way in advance here, but already taking a look at the 25-26 NBA and NHL seasons and thinking, who can we find at a price? And that would be my recommendation there. Those two teams may seem far-fetched. Pistons at 60-1 to win it all, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Canada hasn't had the cup. I was talking to a good friend of ours, used to coach the Florida Panthers, Doug McLean. Also was a coach and GM with the Columbus Blue Jackets when they came on the scene. Great guy. We have these interviews up on social media, Instagram and TikTok and several other places. And he said the only way the cup might be kept in Canada is if their prime minister put a substantial tariff on it, taking off on the old Trumpian philosophy, and would not allow the cup to leave the country. That was probably be the only way they would retain it. But maybe take a shot. I know they've been cursed. They haven't won since Punch Imlach was behind the bench. But if you're getting 20-1 on the Maple Leafs, it doesn't seem that far-fetched as you were looking at something that you could wager on during the offseason in the National Hockey League. All right, a lot of fun being with you today. Tomorrow, Scotty M's going to join us. Thursday, we'll have Mike Jones. Friday, the professor with his big board. So lots to look forward to this week here on Bury Your Bookie. Are you burying your bookie, or are you breaking the bank, or just getting buried yourself? That's the question. And where do these parlay bets fit in with you? I never even considered making a four-man parlay bet on guys to hit home runs, but that's where it's at today. So maybe we need to do a little introspection, take a look at ourselves, and come up with some new strategies. I'm just thinking that's as quick a way as you can find to go broke. Henry Bombs Away Bombsy bet substantial amounts of money to win only on horses that are 3-1 or better. All right, we have to get out of here. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll catch you tomorrow with Scotty M and his selections and his advice on what to take part in on the betting scene. Thanks so much for being with us. We'll see you next time, the next edition of Bury Your Bookie.